One of the most fascinating things I've ever learned while studying human sexuality is that what happens in a woman's mind during intimacy is often more powerful than what happens in her body. We tend to think of sex as something purely physical, a set of movements, sensations, maybe a bit of chemistry. But for women, it's rarely that simple. Behind every touch, every sigh, there's an intricate mental and emotional landscape that can change everything about how the experience feels. Let's start with a truth that might surprise you. During intimacy, many women aren't fully focused on pleasure, at least not at first. Their minds are multitasking, constantly scanning for comfort, safety, and emotional connection. Imagine this: while her body might be saying yes, her mind might still be running background checks. Does he still find me attractive? Am I doing this right? What does my body look like right now? It's a mix of desire and doubt, and both feelings can exist in the same moment. This might sound counterintuitive, but that mental split is deeply wired. Evolutionarily speaking, women's sexuality developed to protect them, to ensure that intimacy happened with someone safe, someone trustworthy. The brain is scanning for signals of security because pleasure and safety share the same neural real estate. When a woman feels emotionally secure, her body interprets it as permission to let go. But when that security wavers, the body reacts, tension builds, arousal dips, and the moment changes. Researchers have actually observed this in brain scans. When women feel anxious or self conscious during intimacy, the parts of the brain responsible for vigilance, like the amygdala, stay active. But when they feel safe, connected, and desired, those regions quiet down and blood flow increases to the parts associated with pleasure and emotion, like the hypothalamus and the nucleus accumbens. In other words, the difference between an okay experience and an incredible one often depends on how the brain feels, not just what the body's doing. And here's something I find fascinating. Women's arousal patterns are often less about the visual and more about the mental context. Men, on average, are more likely to be visually triggered: a revealing outfit, a certain curve, a seductive glance. Women, however, respond more to the story behind it, the emotional charge, the buildup, the anticipation. This doesn't mean women aren't visual, it just means their arousal is deeply narrative. They're feeling the meaning behind the moment as much as the moment itself. Think about it like this: a woman can be physically stimulated, but mentally disconnected, and the experience will feel hollow. But if her mind is engaged, if she feels seen, wanted, and emotionally tuned in, her body follows effortlessly. That's why, for so many women, intimacy isn't just an act, it's a conversation, a story unfolding in real time. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Many women report that during intimacy, their thoughts often drift between pleasure and insecurity. They might think about whether they're pleasing their partner, whether their body looks okay, or even about things that have nothing to do with the moment. Work, stress, dinner plans. This isn't a lack of desire, it's just how the female brain processes stimulation. Studies show that women's default mode network, the brain's wandering system, can stay active longer during sex than men's. It takes time and emotional safety to switch off that inner voice. But once that switch happens, the experience transforms, the body relaxes, sensations sharpen, time blurs. That's when oxytocin, the bonding hormone, kicks in, flooding the body and creating a feeling of closeness that can linger long after the moment ends. That's why women often describe great intimacy as something that makes them feel emotionally high, not just physically satisfied. And yet, this emotional depth is also what makes female sexuality so misunderstood. We often frame women as either too emotional or too complicated, when in reality, their minds are simply more attuned to the relational dynamics that surround sex. For many women, arousal isn't just about attraction, it's about trust, context, and psychological safety. It's about whether she feels admired, accepted, and free from judgment. In one study, researchers found that when women were asked what made sex truly fulfilling, they didn't mention physical techniques first. Instead, they talked about emotional intimacy, feeling desired, being mentally present, and a sense of mutual vulnerability. Those factors predicted more satisfaction than frequency, duration, or even orgasm. In other words, the mind sets the stage long before the body steps in. Let's take a closer look at body awareness. One of the most fascinating psychological factors during intimacy: women are often raised in cultures that teach them to view their bodies through the eyes of others, a concept called self objectification. This means that during sex, many women experience a kind of mental split. They're both participant and observer. Part of them is feeling, but another part is watching, almost as if they're performing. They might be thinking, how do I look right now? Is my stomach flat enough? Does he notice that scar? That mental commentary can be a major barrier to pleasure. When women shift from observing their bodies to actually inhabiting them, what psychologists call body mindfulness, the difference is dramatic. Sensitivity heightens, anxiety fades, and pleasure intensifies. In one experiment, women who practiced mindfulness meditation reported significantly greater sexual satisfaction and fewer distracting thoughts. Why? Because mindfulness helps retrain the brain to focus on sensation rather than self criticism. So, when a woman feels safe enough to stop monitoring herself, when she can trust that she's accepted exactly as she is, her brain literally changes the way it processes touch. The prefrontal cortex, which governs self awareness and judgment, relaxes and the sensory regions take over. That's when she truly lets go, when the body and mind finally sync in that rare electric harmony. But what creates that feeling of safety? It's not grand gestures or perfect words. Often it's subtle cues, the tone of a voice, the steadiness of eye contact, the rhythm of breathing together. Those micro moments send powerful signals to the nervous system that it's okay to relax. They activate the parasympathetic response, the body's rest and connect system, and deactivate the stress response that blocks arousal. It's also worth noting that women's sexual responses are incredibly fluid. They can be shaped by emotions, memories, environment, even hormones throughout the menstrual cycle. For example, research has shown that women often feel more confident and sexually expressive during their fertile window when estrogen peaks. But psychological factors like stress, relationship tension, or feeling undervalued can override biology completely. That's why understanding female sexuality means understanding her inner world. If she's mentally preoccupied, emotionally distant, or self critical, even the most passionate encounter can feel muted. But when she feels desired, valued, and secure, her body becomes a mirror of that emotion, open, responsive, alive. It's interesting to note that in long-term relationships, women's sexual satisfaction is more strongly tied to emotional connection than men's. When women report high levels of communication, empathy, and shared affection with their partner, their sexual satisfaction tends to rise significantly. And that makes sense because for women, intimacy is not just about pleasure, but about being known. This also explains why emotional neglect or unresolved tension can cause desire to fade. It's not that attraction disappears, it's that the emotional foundation erodes. The brain associates intimacy with vulnerability, and if vulnerability doesn't feel safe, desire shuts down as a form of self protection. It's the mind's way of saying, not yet. I don't feel seen. Now, one of the more fascinating things I've seen in studies is that women who feel emotionally connected to their partner experience stronger physiological responses, higher heart rate, greater lubrication, deeper orgasms. It's as if the body amplifies the emotional state. That connection between psychological safety and physical response is so powerful that it can even override certain biological barriers. Women with high anxiety, for instance, often report improved sexual functioning when they feel deeply emotionally bonded to their partner. Love, in many ways, becomes a natural anxiolytic. But let's not romanticize it too much. Because women's sexual thoughts aren't always tender or emotional, they can be bold, primal, even taboo. In fact, studies on women's fantasies show that themes like dominance, risk, and power dynamics are surprisingly common. These fantasies aren't about wanting danger. They're about the thrill of surrendering control in a context that feels safe. Psychologically, it's a way of exploring deep trust. The mind creates scenarios where the body can experience intensity without fear. That's the paradox of female desire safety fuels surrender. The more secure she feels, the deeper she can dive into vulnerability. The more she trusts her partner, the freer she becomes to explore the edges of pleasure. And that trust doesn't just come from grand emotional declarations. It's built in small, consistent gestures, respect, curiosity, and presence. When a woman senses that her partner is attuned to her, not just her body, but her reactions, her comfort, her rhythm, her brain relaxes into the experience. That's when she stops thinking about how she looks and starts feeling how she feels. It's also why communication, both verbal and nonverbal, plays such a crucial role. A simple phrase like, "you feel amazing," or "I love how you move," can silence 1,000 self critical thoughts. And touch, when done with attentiveness, can do even more. Skin to skin contact releases oxytocin and dopamine, the same neurochemicals involved in bonding and reward, creating a feedback loop that deepens emotional connection and heightens physical pleasure. At its core, what women think during intimacy is not a mystery. It's a reflection of what they need to feel safe, desired, and free. The mind isn't an obstacle to pleasure, it's the gateway to it. When the mental noise quiets, when she no longer feels she has to perform, when she trusts that her partner sees her as enough, the body follows naturally. And that's perhaps the most beautiful thing about female sexuality. It's not a switch you flip, it's a flame you nurture. It grows through understanding, patience, and presence. When a woman feels emotionally seen, her body responds with openness. When she feels emotionally invisible, her desire retreats inward. So, if we truly want to understand what women think during intimacy, we have to start by listening not just to their words, but to their silences, their hesitations, their cues. Every thought, every fleeting worry, every spark of excitement tells a story about safety, about connection, about trust. And when those elements align, something extraordinary happens. The mind and body dissolve into one seamless experience of pleasure and presence. In the end, the honest truth is this: women think about everything during intimacy, but the best experiences happen when they no longer have to think at all, when their minds feel calm, their hearts feel secure, and their bodies feel free. That's when intimacy becomes more than just sex, it becomes a mirror of emotional truth. And understanding that, really understanding it, is the first step toward not just better sex, but deeper connection. When people talk about female arousal, they often imagine it as something purely physical, a matter of touch, stimulation, and timing. But what science tells us is far more fascinating. For women, arousal begins in the mind long before it reaches the body. It's not just about skin and nerve endings, it's about thoughts, emotions, context, and connection. Neuroscience has shown us that a woman's brain can amplify, transform, or even block physical pleasure depending on what she's thinking and feeling in the moment. And that's where the real mystery of female desire begins. When a woman is aroused, her brain lights up in a symphony of activity. The hypothalamus kicks in, the command center for hormones, while the limbic system, which handles emotions, comes alive. But at the same time, certain parts of the brain need to quiet down for pleasure to fully unfold. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision making and self awareness, has to take a back seat. It's almost like the mind must let go of control for the body to take over. When that happens, women report feeling deeply present, connected, and lost in the moment. The challenge is modern life rarely gives the mind that chance to relax. Women carry mental load, worries about work, body image, relationships, safety, and even performance. And here's the paradox: the very thing that can make intimacy feel so meaningful, emotional awareness, can also become the biggest barrier to pleasure when the brain doesn't feel safe enough to let go. That's why, for so many women, arousal depends not on physical stimulation, but on emotional and psychological context. There's a remarkable study that illustrates this beautifully. Researchers at the University of Groningen scanned women's brains during sexual arousal and found that when they were relaxed and emotionally comfortable, regions related to fear and anxiety, like the amygdala, turned off, but when they felt self conscious or emotionally uneasy, those same areas stayed active, suppressing arousal signals. In simple terms, the body can only say yes when the brain stops saying wait. So, what's happening in those moments when the brain gives in? It's not just physical pleasure, it's neurological harmony. The release of dopamine, the anticipation chemical, pairs with oxytocin, the bonding hormone. These two work together to create both excitement and trust. That combination explains why women often describe intimacy not just as pleasure, but as connection, a merging of emotional and physical fulfillment that lingers beyond the act itself. And here's something even more intriguing: women's arousal is context dependent. In the lab, psychologists have found that women's sexual responses vary dramatically depending on emotional cues, setting, and even perceived meaning. A kiss from a stranger might feel thrilling in one context, but deeply uncomfortable in another. It's not just who, but how and why. That's because for women, arousal is rarely about the act alone. It's about the emotional story attached to it. Think about this: a woman could be with someone incredibly attractive and still feel nothing if her mind isn't engaged. But if she feels emotionally seen, if her partner makes her feel understood, respected, and desired, her body responds almost instantly. It's like the brain and body are constantly whispering to each other, checking if the coast is clear for pleasure. And when everything aligns, when trust, attraction, and comfort merge, the experience becomes transcendent. That's also why emotional intimacy and communication matter so deeply in women's sexual satisfaction. In long term relationships, studies show that women's arousal and orgasm frequency are closely tied to feelings of emotional connection. When they feel appreciated, safe, and desired, their bodies become more responsive. When emotional closeness fades, when resentment, stress, or emotional distance creep in, the brain interprets it as a kind of threat, and desire naturally declines. It's not about falling out of love. It's about the brain protecting itself from vulnerability. If we look deeper, female arousal is really about balance between surrender and control, between emotion and sensation. The same brain that craves closeness also guards against hurt. The same hormones that drive connection can heighten anxiety if safety is missing. Oxytocin, for instance, isn't just the love hormone. It strengthens whatever bond exists, meaning if a relationship feels nurturing, oxytocin deepens affection. But if it feels insecure, it can intensify feelings of attachment anxiety. The same biology that fuels desire can, under different conditions, magnify emotional tension. That's what makes women's sexuality so fluid and adaptable. It changes with emotional context, relationship quality, and even life stage. Hormones play a role. Yes, estrogen and testosterone both contribute to libido, but they're only part of the story. Arousal depends far more on psychological readiness than hormonal levels alone. You can have all the right biology in place, but if the mind doesn't feel emotionally aligned, the body won't respond the way it could. This mental component also helps explain why women's fantasies can be so diverse and emotionally charged. Female sexual imagination often weaves in narrative, emotion, and power dynamics, things that engage both the body and the mind. It's not always about the act itself, but about the psychological setting, being wanted, surrendering control, exploring curiosity, or feeling utterly free. Neuroscientists believe these fantasies activate the same emotional and sensory circuits as real life experiences, allowing women to explore desires safely through imagination. What's even more fascinating is how fantasy and real world experience can influence each other. When women feel comfortable sharing their desires, or when partners respond with curiosity instead of judgment, the brain registers it as validation. That emotional safety, again, boosts oxytocin and dopamine, creating a cycle where openness deepens arousal and connection. But when desire is shamed or dismissed, the brain shifts towards self protection, reducing libido and emotional engagement. This psychological link between safety and arousal also explains why foreplay, communication, and emotional attunement matter more than technique. Physical touch is only half the equation. The other half is the story being written in the mind, the small nonverbal signals that say, you're safe, you're wanted, you can let go. When those cues are absent, the body stays guarded. When they're present, it opens effortlessly. Now, let's talk about something that often goes unspoken: the dual control model of arousal. It's a concept developed by researchers Eric Jansen and John Bancroft at the Kinsey Institute. They found that sexual desire works like a balance between two systems, the accelerator and the brakes. The accelerator responds to sexually relevant stimuli, things that turn you on, while the brakes respond to potential threats or reasons not to engage. Women, on average, tend to have more sensitive brakes. That doesn't mean they're less sexual, it means they're more contextually tuned. Arousal requires not just pressing the accelerator, but also releasing the brake. And what releases that brake? Emotional safety, trust, and the absence of judgment. This is why emotional connection can heighten physical pleasure so dramatically. When a woman feels psychologically safe, her inhibitory systems relax, her heart rate rises, blood flow increases, and sensitivity heightens. It's a full body response orchestrated by a calm mind. But if she feels pressured, judged, or disconnected, the brakes tighten and no amount of physical stimulation can override it. In other words, arousal isn't about trying harder, it's about feeling safer. That's a profound shift in how we understand women's sexuality. It's not a mechanical process, it's an emotional language. When spoken fluently, it leads to depth and satisfaction that goes beyond physical sensation. You can even see this interplay in long term relationships. Over time, the novelty of sex tends to decrease, but emotional intimacy can actually make experiences richer. Couples who maintain curiosity, empathy, and honest communication often sustain higher levels of sexual satisfaction. Their brains rewire intimacy not as routine, but as renewal, each encounter reinforcing emotional closeness. For women, that connection becomes the foundation for sustained desire. Now, here's something most people don't realize: emotional safety doesn't just increase arousal, it enhances physical pleasure too. Studies have shown that women who feel emotionally bonded with their partner experience more intense and more frequent orgasms. It's not just about technique, it's about neural synchrony. During deep emotional and physical connection, both partners' brainwaves can align, literally sensing rhythm and timing in a shared state of arousal and trust. It's one of the most intimate forms of communication the human brain can achieve. But when that emotional bond weakens, when there's unresolved conflict, neglect, or insecurity, the mind starts to distance itself. Even if physical touch remains, the emotional resonance fades, and so does the intensity of pleasure. This isn't about blame, it's about the brain's protective instinct. When vulnerability feels risky, desire retreats. And yet, here lies one of the most beautiful truths about female sexuality: it's endlessly resilient. When trust is rebuilt and emotional connection restored, desire often returns stronger than before. The brain relearns safety. The body follows. It's a reminder that for women, arousal isn't a fixed trait, it's a living reflection of emotional reality. So when we ask what turns women on, the answer isn't a list of actions, it's a state of mind. It's about feeling desired without judgment, Connected without pressure and free without fear, when that happens, her mind becomes an ally, not a barrier. Every thought, every feeling, every heartbeat becomes part of the experience. What's even more striking is how this understanding of female arousal challenges the old stereotypes, the idea that women are less sexual or more complicated. In truth, their sexuality is just more integrative. The mind, the emotions, and the body don't operate separately. They move in harmony. That's why the most fulfilling sexual experiences are not those that focus on performance, but those that embrace presence. In the end, the honest truth is this: a woman's arousal begins in her thoughts. It's her comfort, her imagination, her sense of safety and connection that unlocks the body's full potential for pleasure. Neuroscience has confirmed what so many women have always known intuitively, that arousal isn't something that happens to them, it's something they create moment by moment with their mind as much as their body. When women feel emotionally seen, their brain becomes the most powerful erogenous zone there is. Every nerve, every breath, every touch becomes a language of trust and surrender. And in that state, sex is no longer just physical, it becomes a form of communication, a wordless dialogue between two nervous systems, two hearts, two stories meeting in the same rhythm. That's the beautiful paradox of female desire. It's fragile, yet fierce, elusive, yet deeply logical. It demands safety before surrender, but when given that safety, it opens up in ways that defy biology and logic. Because for women, arousal is not just about pleasure, it's about connection, meaning, and feeling fully alive. And maybe that's the secret we've been missing all along. The key to women's arousal isn't hidden in their bodies, it's written in their minds. Once we understand that, we stop chasing the mechanics of sex and start exploring the psychology of connection. And in that space, intimacy becomes something richer, deeper, and infinitely more human.